Hello, welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of the Heroes Veritas podcast. I'm your host, Tim Bass, and I'm excited to be here. Last week, we kicked off another chapter of podcasting. Again, we did take a big break between July and this last May. It just wasn't prioritized. Now that we're getting back into it, you're going to see these episodes come out on a weekly basis once again. And as always, we're going to be covering topics that I feel have tactical value in our everyday life. One of the number one things that I set out to do with the Heroes Veritas podcast was to provide a tool set, almost like a run book, if you would, for men to begin living in a way congruent with greatness. And it was partly an experiment / exercise of my own growth and journey, and partly to solve the problem that I felt was happening at that time, which was a lot of cowardice, lack of backbone when it came to principles and virtue, an inability to sit down, internalize, identify what we were struggling with, what we had hurdles with, what we had shortcomings on. And men, as a general rule, painting with a broad stroke, were struggling at that time to find their place, dealing with depression, dealing with high rates of suicide within men. That still continues to this day. And so each one of the episodes since has been an effort to add as much value, give you tactical tool sets that you can use day to day, week to week, month to month, to completely revolutionize your life. To that end, and actually before I get into that, a couple of announcements. We have some big things changing on the Heroes Veritas side. When I started this, it was primarily targeted at men. The podcast will continue to be spoken to men, as those are the group that I have experience with. I have no idea what it's like to be a woman. And so when I speak, it will be primarily targeted at men. The language will be more masculine towards the male demeanor. Therefore, while the tips and the tactics are more than functional and capable to help women, that is why you will see the demeanor and the vernacular and rhetoric that I use being more targeted towards men. That being said, as we move forward, Heroes Veritas is going to be stepping into a space where I will be working to deliver content and solutions and value to both sides of the aisle, men and women, in an effort to create an holistic overabundance of culture and morality and virtue and principles and tactics and tool sets, so that I can make as big of an impact on the world as I possibly can. To that end, I have expanded on my team. I believe I mentioned it briefly on last episode, to begin bringing in other sides of that expertise. However, as I mentioned, just to reiterate, this podcast will continue to be targeted at men, as I am a man, and that is what my experience is in entirely. That being said, as we move out and we build out these tool sets and we expand on what we can offer, you will see things that may not scream masculinity. They may not be in the same vein or vertical that I have spoken about in the past. Digressing back into the topic that I wanted to talk about today, and why I gave kind of a brief history on why I started and what I was trying to solve for. I recently had a very good conversation with a very good individual in the psychiatric field, many years of experience, somebody that I actually just met that evening, but enjoyed the conversation. What's the best word for this? Entirely. I don't think that really captures how I felt about the conversation. It was very enlightening. It was very challenging because there was a psychological element to that conversation where there was almost like a psychological, analytical underlying tone to it, where every time I said something or every time I brought up a conversation, or even the thought patterns of how do you get to this point? What do you think about this? Typically culminated in a psychoanalytical conversation about my behavior and what I believe in and how I got to be who I am and things like that. And it was very enlightening for me. It provided a lot of insight as far as why I do the things I do, why I understand the things that I do, and why I feel that I need to take up this charge However, there was one thing that took place during that conversation that was funny, but I felt like it was necessary to address. I thought it brought in a bigger conversation. And that was in exploring my Instagram and my social media presence, his position was, this is an individual who seems the type to write manifestos. But I took that as a positive, and I was like, yes, of course, that is exactly why my Instagram is set up the way it is, because it is a manifesto. This is what I believe. This is me planting my flag. This is me publicly declaring how I believe I shall move through this world, how I shall process and integrate myself into the corporeal world. However, I could tell by my response that that's not what he meant. He meant it more negative, more Dahmer Gacy manifesto, more communist manifesto than a declaration of planting my flag. And so it was an interesting conversation because it created a very good inflection point for that discussion. And my question in return was, why is that bad? And there was moments within that space where you could tell people around us got to be a little uncomfortable. He and I were completely content in our own little conversation bubble, and that was fine. But others were like, uh-oh, is this going to get tense? Is this going to get deep? Is this going to get dark? Like, how is this going to play out? And it was overall a very good conversation. It was a very deep conversation. But the reality is that a manifesto is purely and simply a public declaration of ideologies, virtues, values, premise by which you're going to live your life. Jesus made a manifesto. If you look at 10 Commandments, those are a manifesto. However, in our current space in today's society, we have aligned manifesto with a lot of negative spaces like the Communist Manifesto, which I mentioned before. If you followed me for any length of time, you know that I am anti-communist, socialist, fascist. I believe that history has given us more than ample and abundant examples of how failed and flawed those constructs are. They never work. And so when you do that, or you couple it to terrorist manifestos, you couple it to extremist manifestos, I can see where he was coming from. And the media, the mainstream media, tends to do this, where they will take a word and they'll pervert it for their use. And it will take on a new characteristic of either negative or fear mongering or something of that nature. But its definition is nowhere near that. It is only as morally charged as the evoker chooses to make it. And so it was an interesting thought exercise for myself. I returned home and I started thinking about, like, well, yeah, I am a manifesto. I am a plant my flag. I am going to declare myself to the world. I'm going to say, this is what I believe. And I, don't fear the repercussions necessarily, as some do. And I think that there's a strong masculine necessity for planting our flag and saying, this is what I believe, and this is how I shall go forth into the world and bring my will to the world. And in doing that thought exercise, I realized why people got tight in that conversation, because when you hear manifesto, you think the negative, you think the danger, the violence, the control, the authoritarian, the tyrannical, where the manifesto states you will do X or X will happen to you. That is not what a manifesto is. A manifesto is merely the ability to dictate, orate, and articulate your belief system in such a manner that you say, this is the way I shall live, this is the way I shall present myself to the world. And whether you agree or disagree, it will not change who I am in my core and what I do. And the manifesto is an exact example of where we have lost use of our language, where, as a general rule, painting with a broad brush, the language has lost its gravitas, because manifesto has now been attached to violence. Manifesto has now been attached to negativity, evil at times. But in reality, the manifesto is a very powerful tool in conviction and deliberation and discernment and setting a perimeter and deciding what tribe you want to be a part of. The manifesto creates the profound border of who we are inside, who we choose to be. And so, yes, I very much write manifestos. I live by a manifesto. And I once saw a quote, and I can't remember who it was from, and I apologize. Perhaps I will look it up and put it in the um, description below. And I can't speak because I don't know who said it or where it's from, to the quality of the character of the person who said it. But the reality is that a manifesto should be, it is better to have a manifesto simple and of one line but accomplished than have a 25 line manifesto without action, without success. And that's where a lot of people tend to find themselves at an impasse, the convergence points of their manifesto. Most people don't understand that they hold manifestos. It could be as easy as the golden rule: do unto others as I would like done unto me. That is a manifesto. It's a very simple manifesto, and if you live by that and you expect others to follow in that space and give you the respect of that boundary, then that in itself is a manifesto. Be good to each other, love thy neighbor, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. These are manifestos. These are parts and partial and in whole a manifesto, an ability to dictate to the world, this is who I am, to articulate, this is my principle, and this is how I make my way through the world. Now, in today's society, and a lot of times my grievances with today's society is that we attach ourselves to principles that serve us in a moment. They are sycophantic at best. They're ego stroking and dopamine doubling, and they are there specifically and wholly to make others feel like they are doing their part, when in reality they take no risk. Therefore, there is no doing their part. They make no change. There is no elicited response from society by making verbose virtue signaling statements of I stand with so and so, pray for so and so, do 22 push-ups a day for so and so, do ice bucket challenges for so and so. These people, they believe this to be a manifesto, and it is far from a manifesto. And I would challenge you to find your manifesto. And I am not saying or eliciting violence. I am not saying to do evil unto others. I am not saying to elicit your will upon other people by force or authoritarian regime. I am merely saying, take a moment, take a breath, take a moment, take a week, take a month, become introspective and decide, what hill will you die on? What are your principles? How do you live? How do you breathe? What will change if you don't? How do you respond to criticisms? How do you determine the people you have around you, assets and liabilities? This is a manifesto. This is the power of a manifesto. It allows us the ability to withstand the burden of criticism. It is the ability to withstand the consequences of our actions and our choices with full knowledge and responsibility of who we are and what we believe in. That is the power of the manifesto. And so to see that so many have such a negative assumption, articulation, and connection to the idea of the manifesto, it's truly saddening. Because when man can speak in whole that he is, I am, I shall always be, there is power. There is power, there is beauty, there's strength, and there's community. Because when you can speak and say, this is who I am, without question, without fearing the outcome, without wondering who likes you, who doesn't like you, this is true confidence. This comes from the manifesto. So I challenge you. A call to arms, a call to action, a call to rally, a call to discussion, a call to in-depth thought, a call to emotional, beautiful poetry. Find your manifesto. What do you stand for? A man who stands for nothing falls for anything. What do you stand for? Because if you have not determined what you stand for, someone else will tell you what you will fall for. You will be manipulatable. You will be malleable. You will be soft. You will be controllable. So find your manifesto. Find the power in determining exactly who you are and how far you're willing to go to maintain exactly who you are. I'm Tim Bass. I hope you join us next time. This is a very special episode for me because it was a very powerful episode for me. I hope you guys like, share, subscribe. Check me out on social media. Comment below if you have any questions. Maybe I'm off my mark for you, and that's totally fine. But we'll check you next time on Heroes Veritas Podcast.
atmosphere.